I want to welcome you to our fifth in the series of Winter Potato School webinars brought to you by Wood Prairie Family Farm in Bridgewater, Maine. Okay, good. Looks like we're getting through. So thanks for that. We've, I guess as they say, when it rains, it pours. As some of you may know, last night there was some glitch with the internet software provider, and they dumped all of the folks that had registered up till that point and prevented anyone from registering. So we rectified that this morning. We've got a nice group of people that have, surprising how quickly they've signed up this morning. So we've got a good crowd, and thank you so much for your patience, and we'll get on with this. Okay. This week, maybe it was last week, this time of year we work 7 days a week keeping up with shipping orders, so the weeks kind of blur together. But either this week or last week, a new edition of Zest magazine, which is here in Maine, came out, and they did a story on us. They had a photographer here last fall, and this is one of the photographs in the article. You can see the URL at the bottom of the slide. That's where you can find the article, and they've got a nice recipe that Megan supplied to them. But that's our youngest daughter, Amy, who's she'll be 13 here next week, in fact. So she's 12 in that, and she is holding, does anybody know what variety of potato that is? For those who have been attending the other webinars, it's a variety that we've already covered in one of the earlier webinars. But if you think you might know what that variety is, go ahead and provide it to us. Oh, Frank is pointing out that I put the butte in the caption. Well, that was really a pretty easy hint. So that is butte, and that is one monster-sized butte. I would guess that probably weighs about a pound. And we had a very beautiful crop of butte this year, and the photographer happened to be up on the day that we were harvesting that crop. Teresa, I see, is indicating that she's losing us. Is this any better now? Let me know if the audio quality is coming in. So anyway, this Zest magazine, it's online, but there's only a couple of photographs online. They sent us some copies of the print edition, which has quite a few more harvest photographs, and it's a fun magazine. We were looking through it after we got our copies, and I think it's fairly new, and I don't know how wide-ranging its availability is, but I know that you can find them on newsstands within Maine and hopefully within New England and maybe further than that, but I really don't know. So Frank has posted on the chat the link, and that's a hot link, so they can click on that and get to it. Looks like, okay, good. Anyway, it's a fun article, tells a little bit about the history of Wood Prairie Farm, and most importantly, there's some beautiful photographs. They had a nice photographer, and she did a good job with the photographs. Okay, so we want to get into talking about the situation where you've got your potato crop planted, and now what is it that you need to do to ensure that you're going to get a good harvest through the growing season, or the conclusion of the growing season. So as an organic farmer, the most of what we do is really done prior to this step in getting the ground ready and really reaching back and having a good crop rotation. These are all things that are important, and it teaches the lesson that most of what you're doing as an organic gardener or an organic farmer is to get that soil built up as best you can before you plant the crop. Now, the things that you can do, as in many cases, are directly connected to scale. If you should have a small garden and you're able to add great amounts of organic matter like old leaves in the fall or manure, or straw or compost or anything like that, you can really get the fertility up, and that soil can become very rich to the point where you don't need additional fertilizer. It's rich, and if you've got sufficient organic matter, you probably have great tilth, and you're going to grow healthy plants. The challenge in the organic system that as you continue to get larger and larger, that intensive type of input and production is no longer possible. So once you get up to, you know, say even a garden approaching a quarter of an acre, it's much more difficult to try to build that soil up. And of course, when you get up to 10 or 100 or 1,000 acres, it becomes progressively that much more challenging. So what we're going to talk about today in terms of fertility, these, if you have a very small plot, it may not apply to you, but I think the truism that as you get larger in scale, I think more and more this becomes a concern to you. So with that as an introduction, let's talk about soil. In terms of organic farming and organic gardening, soil is everything. It is the foundation of everything we do. It's the basis of every decision that we're making. We're always looking at what can we do to improve the soil, and management decisions that we're making are always taking into account what impact will this have on the soil. Is this going to improve the soil, or is this going to be detrimental to the soil? So an organic farmer really is a soil-centric farmer, and I think in time this is going to become apparent to all. So in order to have a healthy soil, you know, well, what is a healthy soil? Well, one of the things, it's a living soil. There are living organisms in a healthy soil that are helping to break down carbon residue, make plant nutrients, make mineral nutrients available to plants, improve the ability for the soil, for the field, to be able to take in either excessive rain amounts or to be able to provide in a dry spell to provide adequate moisture for the growth of the plant. So this is all accomplished by the soil. So what's called a balanced soil is one to where most of us are following ratios that were developed by Dr. Albrecht back in the 1940s, and he had for the macro and some of the micronutrients in the soil, he had various percentages of which they should occupy, they should be in the soil in a healthy, well-balanced soil. So if we find, using Dr. Albrecht's ratios as the starting point, if we find that, say, we're low in phosphorus or low in magnesium, it's important to become aware of that, and then different minerals are in association with different minerals. So it can get pretty complicated. So there are tools out there that can help us, and there are 5 that I've got on this slide, and I want to talk a little bit about each one because I think they all have value even today as techniques for helping us to better analyze our soil and the fertility that's in that soil. Because the adage is this: healthy soil grows healthy plants. Healthy plants are naturally resistant to disease pressure and insect pressure, and that is really the first line of defense for any organic gardener or any organic farmer. So way back before they had laboratory testing going on, one trick that farmers would do, and you have to think in the context of back a ways, farmers would grow their own hay for their own livestock. They'd grow their own grain or root crops for their own livestock. So it was kind of a closed system, and in that way they could set out different trays with different mineral materials. For example, there might be a calcitic limestone, a limestone high in calcium. There might be a dolomitic limestone, which is a limestone that not only has calcium, but it has a high amount of magnesium. And they would set these trays out in the pasture so that the cattle could free feed. And what the cows will do, the cows will sense what mineral is deficient in their diet coming from the fields on that farm, and that's where they will preferentially lick up minerals. So you could, by identifying what minerals were being chosen by the cows, you could figure that's what your farm is deficient in. And that was a very simple way that farmers could decide, do I need calcitic lime? Do I need dolomitic lime? Do I need other minerals? So that was a way, a healthy, simple, practical, natural way where cows on one farm could tell that farmer what was needed in the soil to balance it. Nature's soil scientist there. So there's a book that I've owned for 35 years anyway, and it's a small book, and I imagine it's still available, but I haven't looked that up. But the title is Weeds and What They Tell by Pfeiffer, and what this book does, the essence of this book is if you've got a weed in your field, you can look it up in Pfeiffer's book, and you can analyze what soil-based problem you have that would result in that weed. So one that I have firsthand knowledge with and experience with is we used to have a minor problem with Canadian thistle. And this is a plant that grows about 2 or 3 feet tall. When it goes into blossom, it's actually got kind of a pretty blossom, a purplish blossom. But once it goes full, it'll spread that that seed far and wide, and it's something you definitely want to capture before it does that. And the thistle does have really pointy needles on it, and you want to have leather gloves when you're getting it out. Okay. Thank you, Bianca. Bianca has a link here on Amazon as to where to get this book, Weeds and What They Tell by Pfeiffer. Thank you for that. So we had Canadian thistle at the bottom of a hill in a field that ran kind of long. And what I came to realize was that as I was harrowing in the spring, that, when I had the disc in deep, if I was kind of not paying attention and starting to go up that hill, my tires would slip a little bit because of the incline and the increased amount of horsepower needed. And that spinning of the tires was compacting the soil. And Pfeiffer, in his book, tells us that Canadian thistle likes compacted soil. So the only part of that field that had thistle in it was right at that point. Well, in the fullness of time, we ended up shifting the rotation on that field by 90 degrees. So we now farm on the contour on that field. But once we identified the problem was doing harm to the soil, unwittingly, but doing harm to the soil, once we corrected that, we've eliminated that problem with Canadian thistle. So we didn't need to use a herbicide. What we needed to do was understand that that weed that was there was communicating to us some failure in our management, some failure in the fertility. So that really, I think, is a good approach, and this book by Pfeiffer I find really valuable and would recommend it to everyone. Find out, identify what weeds you've got, and if you go online now, you can identify most every weed that you've got. There's a lot of good photographs, and you can track it down and be a detective. But everybody should know what weeds you have on your own garden or on your own farm, and then you can, become an expert on those weeds, and that is how you're going to successfully manage them, by understanding the weed, and then through understanding it, you find what that weed's weakness is, and then you can alter your management, alter your fertility in your soil. Another problem that we had, this kind of leads into some of these latter ones, the laboratory-based soil testing. But we had a weed that we identified as corn spurry, and it's a low-growing weed, and it would tend to come into fields that we were growing carrots following potatoes. And what we came to find out is that corn spurry likes excessive potassium and insufficient phosphorus. Well, what was interesting about this was we've been taking soil tests that we've turned into the University of Maine for the last 40 years, and they were advising us that we had plenty of phosphorus and that we had insufficient potassium. And potatoes uses a lot of potassium, and for 100 years in Aroostook County, farmers have been applying phosphorus to the soil to get the highest quality and the highest yields in potatoes. So this, I don't want to get too deep into this, but there are different analyses, different techniques that soil labs use in determining materials. And I believe that the soil testing that University of Maine does, and this is fairly common among land-grant universities across the country as I understanding, it's more of a mining assay in that they are going to determine using phosphorus. Maybe that's the best example. They'll determine in that plow layer, the top 6 inches soil contains 2,000 pounds of soil, and they'll determine what percent of that soil is phosphorus, and that'll come down to, you know, just how many pounds of phosphorus you have per acre. Well, the problem is the vast majority of that phosphorus is tied up in the soil and it's not available to plants. So if you have a soil test that is telling you, you know, you've got $1 million worth of phosphorus in the soil, but in reality, the availability is kind of like going to the cash machine at the bank, and it's only allowing you $300 a day limit. So you may have $1 million in the bank, but if you can only withdraw $300 a day, that's an indication that that $1 million in the bank it might make you feel good, but if you don't have access to it, it's not doing you, or in this case, the plant, much good. So I think the best soil tests are going to be the ones that give the best replication of reality, of what really is going on in the soil. And what gardeners and farmers need to know is what availability is there of the nutrients in the soil. It's much less important how much we have out there in total. And in fact, after 100 years of applying probably too much potassium in Aroostook County in major potato growing areas, we don't really need to apply much potassium because there's so much in the soil. So our job is to make it available to the plants that are growing, and you know, thank the farmers that came before us for applying it, because we in many cases, at least on our farm, in our experience, we don't need to add any phosphorus, even though University of Maine, that's what they were recommending. We were able to, again, through analyzing what weeds are growing, we were able to see that we had an imbalance in the soil, and that by correcting that, we've largely eliminated corn spurry as a weed within our farm. So it's kind of fun to be a detective and to figure this out. And the great thing about it is you don't need to use chemical herbicides. There are, you know, if you can get an understanding of what makes that weed tick, then through management you can avoid having a problem. So soil testing, there is a whole gamut. There's a wide continuum of soil testing labs. Some do a great job, some do maybe not as good a job as others. So one that we recommend is we send our samples to Lancaster Ag Products, which is an Amish-owned company in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And you can find them online. I think it's lancasterag.com. And they contract with Midwest out in Iowa, I think it is, and they send out a batch of soil samples that farmers send in every week. And the analysis comes back about a week later, a week or 10 days later. And it's very good quality. They actually do 3 different tests on the same soil sample. So we used to use International Ag Labs in Minneapolis, and they also do a very good job. But the testing we get back from LAP gives us 3 different tests for the same $50. So you're going to pay $50 whether you do a soil test with International Ag Labs or LAP via Midwest. And if you can get back, three lab tests, 3 times the information, that's a really good deal. So they're very detailed. They tell you things like organic matter content, cation exchange content, and then the various macro and micronutrients. And there are some, like in this area, boron and zinc tend to be in limited quantities to the extent that it can affect potato quality and yield. Boron is a very water-soluble micronutrient, so given our rainy eastern climate, that can get washed out. So those are 2 that we have learned to pay particular attention to, and it's a relatively inexpensive material to apply as a foliar spray. So we pay attention to that. We apply it early in the season so that it can be taken up by the plant and benefit the development of the tubers. And that's part of the quality of our tubers and the quality of the seed from them is a reflection on the health and the balance of the soil that creates the good quality seed that is going to perform that much better. So these are important things to do. So a soil test is a good way to get started, aim you in the right direction. Further refinements, and I should say this, let me back up. If you've got a small, healthy garden and the plants are doing good, you don't need to go to all these things. But when you're growing on a scale, it's very difficult to bring up the organic matter and get the fertility right where you want it. So many of us on a larger scale have a somewhat sophisticated foliar fertility program. So we're out there in the field every 7 or 12 or 14 days applying. We have a 300-gallon sprayer, and we started out 35 years ago applying liquid seaweed and liquid fish, and now we still use that as the foundation of our foliar program, but we also apply other materials. We have a coral calcium that we find is good, and calcium is kind of the Rodney Dangerfield of nutrients. It tends to get overlooked, but it's extremely important, maybe one of the most important nutrients in the soil. And if our testing indicates that we are low in boron and zinc, then we'll apply that as a foliar material as well. So soil tests are the first thing, and then plant tissue testing. 35 days after emergence, you can take your leaf samples and send them to, Bianca is asking, can you provide links for all these lovely nutrients? Well, Bianca, I'd say your best thing would be to get a soil sample, send it to LAP, and then find out, what nutrients are. There's just a lot of nutrients out there, and what I'm talking here in Maine, what we've got, we've got a selenium deficiency in Maine, but out west where it's dry, they have selenium at high levels to where it can become toxic. So it really comes down to your locality, and I really think getting a soil test is the very best first step so that you can see where you are, because you're not going to become an expert on every nutrient, nor need you, but by doing a soil test, that can aim you in the right direction and let you know which nutrients you have to pay attention to, and the ratios. That's all provided. These soil tests are a wealth of information, and I think they're well worth $50. So the next step is plant tissue testing, and that you can, at the first point, it's 35 days after emergence, and you want to take leaves off the top of the plant that have just, that a week ago they didn't exist. And a leaf in a potato is not just a single, I'm not sure the phraseology here, anybody else would call it a leaflet. It's a petiole, but it would have a stem, and there would be leaves coming out on the edge. So, what I'm calling a leaf sample is actually probably 7 leaves around a stem. And if you look at how a potato grows, That's what it is. But a leaf on a potato is really a petiole, or that entire leaflet. So it would fit on about a 3x5 card. It's about that big. So you want to get 20 of those. Pick them, maybe right after the dew has got off in the morning, 9:30 or 10 in the morning, and while it's still cool, collect them, put them in a Ziploc bag, and then mail it down. In our case, we use University of Maine for this, and it's quite interesting. We send off the test, we get the test back, and then you correlate between the tissue results and the soil results, and invariably, even with LAP's lab testing, they tend to be, our experiences, they tend to be overly optimistic as to what uptake there will be in the plant, because they may say that our phosphorus levels are, say, moderate, and the tissue sample tells us that they're actually low. So in that way, we benefit from applying liquid seaweed, and the fish, which, those complement one another. But the point is, where the rubber meets the road, these tissue tests can really tell you exactly what's going on in the plant, so whether you're getting that uptake. But our experience is the soil tests tend to be on the optimistic side, and that they don't, all those nutrients that the soil test told you were plant available may not be, and that's where a foliar program becomes valuable. So the newest development, which has been in this country now for 2 or 3 years, to my knowledge, is called plant sap analysis. So in this way, you do the same collection of petioles or leaflets, but rather than test the tissue, which has been, been formed by the plant, the test is actually testing the sap. And the sap is the constituent that is, the plant food that's going to then be made into plant tissue. But the beauty of this is when you take a tissue test, basically it's telling you what went on, 4 weeks ago. When you're taking this sap test, it's telling you 4 weeks before that tissue test could. So it's a way of really getting early information on what's going on with that plant, and coming up with, a strategy that if there is a deficiency that will cause an imbalance in the plant, less than full health, which then could lead to either disease pressure or insect pressure. So this, the company that I know is Crop Health Labs. Michelle Gregg, who actually was with OFA, Ohio Ecological Farmers Association, and they were one of our plaintiffs in our lawsuit against Monsanto. So we've known Michelle for quite a while. She's now running this company, and they're doing the testing now in Ohio. In their first year, they were overnighting the leaf samples to Holland, where they had the state-of-the-art laboratory to figure this stuff out. And we would take a sample first of the week, and by the end of the week, that same week, we would get back our sap analysis. And it's a very interesting program, and it's one that we're just getting a start with, so we don't have a lot of experience, but I think that it's a wave of the future. And if you can, for at $70 a sample, if you can get this kind of early detection, early information, and then come up with a solution, it's really going to pay dividends in terms of soil health. So anyway, those are the 5 different types of testing that we know about, and I think each of them have their place even in the modern day farming. Okay, so if you have your fertility together, you've got to jump on everything, not only insect pests and disease, but you're also going to have a balance, as I've mentioned, with Pfeiffer's book on weed pressure. So I got this photograph off the internet. I don't know what that weed is. We don't have it here, thankfully. It looks like it could create quite a carpet. But you see the potato coming up through, and right off the bat, you've got a mess there that looks to me like, whatever kind of weed it is, it looks to me like it's low growing. So I would guess that the potato plant, if it's got sufficient fertility, it's going to outgrow that weed. But you're still going to have a carpet, which actually could become a bit of a problem at harvest time, depending on how mechanized your harvesting operation is. If you have a carpet of weeds that the tops and the roots are just holding together the soil as a blanket, that could be a bit of a headache trying to harvest potatoes out of it. But the point is, and I think maybe the most important thing to think about with weeds is timeliness. This really should have been, these weeds should have been controlled before now. Once they've gotten that kind of establishment, they're anchored in pretty well. So in our case, we would use our flamer at, I would say that plant is up, and that probably, if you looked across the field, you probably have something like 40% emergence at that point. And I would have recommended on a field like that, if I felt there was going to be that kind of weed pressure, I would go in at 1 or 2% emergence with a propane flamer, a curtain flamer, which has a 6-foot wide band of flame. And I would flame out that. It would have killed all of the young developing weeds. It would have singed the 10% or less, 1% to 10% of plants, of potato plants that have emerged, but that's not going to hurt them, and they're going to bounce right back. And then a week later, I would have come through with a finger weeder and mechanically taken out any of the weeds that survived having been flamed. The big challenge in growing potatoes on a field scale, it's not the weeds between the row, because we're doing so much earth moving and building the row up. One could be very could pity any weed that found itself growing between the 2 rows of potatoes, because it's going to get wiped out. The challenge is the in-row weeds, and that's where we found that the flaming and the finger weeding is really good. But as I say, if you've got adequate fertility, you're going to minimize some of these problems. If you get quick emergence, if you've got high quality seed with a lot of vigor in it, it's going to come up through the ground quicker, and you're kind of in a race. You're trying to get the plants to grow fast so you can get row closure, because once the potatoes, if they've been properly spaced and adequately fertilized and have sufficient moisture in the form of water or irrigation, those plants are going to basically cover the ground at row closure, which in our area we get done, we get done planting about the 7th of June, and then we get row closure about the 18th or 20th of July. So about 6 weeks after planting, it gets to the point where you can't even see where the rows are, because it's just one solid field of potatoes, and there just isn't any light getting down to the surface of the field at that point. So there isn't going to be any more germinating of weeds, because they need light to be able to germinate. So if you do your good job weeding, again timing, if you do your timely weeding early on, you're going to have the rest of the summer that you can go fishing and not have to be weeding. But if you do a lousy job early on, you're going to be fighting with weeds all summer. So timeliness is important, and most especially with weeds. So this is the reward from doing things right early on. This is probably 5 or 6 days before row closure. We've made the last pass, probably 3 days prior to this, the last pass with hose on a tractor, and we hilled up the soil underneath the plants, and then within the next few days you're going to get row closure, where the leaves from one row will start to touch the leaves from the other row, and about 10 days from now you would not even really be able to see from a distance where the rows begin and end. It's just going to be a solid mass of potatoes. And so if you're doing things right, you can just imagine if a weed crop is severely competing with the potato crop, they're taking nutrients, and in some cases, if it's a tall weed, they're taking light from the potato crop, and that's got to have an impact in terms of yield. So on the other hand, if you get your details right, have vigorous seed, have good fertility, you can get clean fields like this that are going to yield the highest possible yield with the best nutritional content. So that's what we're all after, is good nutrition. So let's shift now to talking about some of the insect pests that can plague potatoes. And I assume that most everybody knows our friend the Colorado potato beetle. This insect is known to occur in temperate climates in all potato-producing regions in the world because of its wide distribution geographically and because of its incredible ability to cause damage. It is considered one of the top 4 agricultural pests in the world. And just think about it. This is one tough kind of insect. If you think about it, Colorado potato beetles have been co-evolving with members of the nightshade family for tens of thousands of years. So this is a bug that prefers to eat a deadly nightshade plant that would do in most anybody else. And this is now, it's, you know, over thousands and thousands and thousands of generations, it's come to think that this is one pretty good food, whether it be potatoes or eggplants. I've never heard of a problem with tomatoes, and I don't know why that is, but I do know that potato bugs can cause severe impact on potatoes, and I have a slide coming up where I can show you some more. But this is the adult stage. Potato bugs will overwinter in this adult stage. They will, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe half of them will migrate out of the field, usually heading south, sometimes heading west. And there will be maybe the other half or maybe a third will just drop off the plant, and they will go dormant. I guess you'd call that hibernate at where the base of the plant is in the field. And if we get a nice open winter and we have frost that goes into the soil, it's not as common now as it was, you know, before climate chaos came along. But, you know, we used to be able to get 4 to 6 feet of frost in the ground. You can imagine the high mortality on a potato bug that was lazy enough to fall to the bottom of the plant and not walk out of the field. If they do walk out of the field where you've got forest duff growing, you usually don't get frozen ground. You get frozen ground where human beings kind of destroy the soil texture, or say you plow snow off of the road, and then that frost will penetrate, you know, 4 to 6 feet. But in a forest, I've seen this several times, I just don't see frost. You've got that duff, you've got that aerated soil, and you do not get this penetration of frost. So these migrating Colorados that head out of the field, that is what keeps them going, because the ones in the field in a climate like northern Maine's climate, I think there's a very high mortality rate. So this is the adult stage. This is what you will see emerging in the spring, and underneath that, you know, those beetle, I don't know my beetle terminology, but they got wings underneath that striped portion on their body, and it takes them about 72 or 75 degrees Fahrenheit before it's warm enough for them to stretch their wings and fly. So up until that point, they are restricted to traveling by walking. And there have been times where I've seen them walking across the tarred road, Kinney Road, and it's almost like, I mean, this is going back 20 years ago, but it's almost like a science fiction movie with the numbers so great, like, you know, kind of the, you know, concept of, you know, biblical proportions of locusts taking over. They can really become a populated critter. So here's the life cycle. They lay their eggs, which are golden orange, on the underside of potato leaves. Each female adult has the capacity of laying about 400 eggs in her lifetime that year. So if you're able to kill a female before she lays the eggs, you've got a lot less headache coming down. But you can see those eggs are probably the size of about a head of a pin. And when the Colorado larvae hatch, they start out being the size of that, you know, of the egg, the size of a head of a pin. And then this is a picture of the larva. And you can see some of the smallest there. The scientists talk of 4 different stages of growth on the potato bugs. And they go through, they call them instars. I'm not an entomologist, and I don't know why they call it that, but they do. So I'd say that smallest bug that you see in the mid screen on the left, that's probably a second instar. And those two big boys there, I would say that that's third or almost fourth instar. Once they get up to the fourth instar, they will fall off the plant and they'll pupate in the soil and they'll come up as an adult. And you can feel them when you squish them. You can feel a difference. The overwintering Colorados are going to be hard shell. You know, there's a resistance when you squish them between your thumb and forefinger. The newly emerged pupated first generation Colorados, they're going to have a soft shell. They're basically going to be looking like one of these big fourth stars with kind of an overcoat of the striped appearance on, but they're still pretty soft. So here's the key. Whereas, you know, it's easy to see those adults and they do some damage eating. It's really, most of the damage is caused by the larva. And if you look at it, the growth from hatch up to fourth instar is entirely dependent on the air temperature. The hotter it is, the quicker they develop. So you go from that first instar up to the fourth instar, and you've got, you know, hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of these bugs in your field, or, you know, smaller numbers in your garden. And they're going to have to consume a lot of potato foliage to be able to grow. And, you know, again, one female lays 400 eggs, you got 400 larvae, and they're all wanting to grow up big to pupate and to reproduce. So that is where most of the damage comes in. Here's one anecdote I can relate about how what a radical difference there is in the growth rates. In 1991, we had a hot, dry year, and it took 72 hours to go from hatch up to fourth instar. And back in those days, we were using a Bacillus thuringiensis as our primary means of control. And back in that area in the late 80s and early 90s, these potato bugs were wild. They were completely out of control. Even the chemical pesticides had resulted in failures. They stopped working, and there were actual conventional farmers that were reporting crop failures to where they had no insecticide that would any longer be effective against Colorados. Colorados, because they have been, you know, they've been eating nightshades for tens of thousands of years. They're a rugged insect. The rule of thumb is that it takes 10 to 12 generations for a new insecticide, for the Colorados to become resistant to a new insecticide. So in Aroostook County in northern Maine, 9 out of 10 years we have a single generation, meaning we go through the cycle of an adult coming out of the woods, laying its eggs, the eggs hatching, going through the 4 instars, the fourth instar larva dropping into the soil, pupating, and then coming out again as a soft shell Colorado, and that's it. And then they're going to, you know, live through that year, and then they're going to be the ones that overwinter. But in most years, we do not have more than one generation up here. The years that we would have is going to be a hot year. And again, as this anecdote explains, the heat really speeds along their development. Now, you go down to central Maine and southern Maine, and they're going to have 2 generations every year, and maybe at the southern tip of Maine, you may even have 3 generations a year. And once you get down to Long Island, you've got a solid 3 generations a year. So you're going through 3 cycles of this development. Well, that means if you're a chemical company that comes up with a new insecticide for potato farmers, and you introduce it on Long Island, you've got about 4 years that you're going to get good out of that before these Colorados develop resistance based on the way that farmers use it. They tend to come up with a new insecticide and they'll use it, you know, year after year after year without rotating. The smart way to do it is to always rotate between different classes of insecticide to try to break up. That's called resistance management, and it's the right way to do things. But most farmers, in my experience, once they come up with a successful product, they're going to use it until it stops working. So this must cause the chemical companies to pull their hair out, because good management could extend the use of this. But bottom line is that you've got 10 or 12 generations historically before an insecticide fails to be used. They used to use DDT on these critters, and then back in the late 60s, DDT finally failed. And the new ones that have come along, they have a limited generation before they fail, and there's another one they have to use. So it's a tough animal, tough critter to have to deal with. But so in the hot year of 1991, it took 72 hours or 3 days to go from hatch to fourth instar. The next year, 1992, was a very cool, wet summer, and it took 3 weeks, 21 days, to make that same growth. So going from hatch to fourth instar in a cold year, we counted the days, and it was 21 days, and the year before it took 3 days. So you can imagine that's why, if you're at a lower latitude than we are in northern Maine, you're going to have more heat. You're going to likely have more generations, and obviously if you got more generations, you're going to have more of a pressure. We've got enough pressure, but we know what they can do, and potato bugs left to their own devices and without any control can cause significant harm, and even to the point of crop failure. So back in the old days, one of the techniques for controlling Colorado potato beetles was to pay the kids a penny a bug, and they'd go through the fields with a cup, and they'd collect it. And I still think that that's a very good idea. And if you've got kids that need to learn the lessons of hard work, I don't know what the inflated rate now would be. Maybe it would be a nickel, but I think even it would still be a value at a nickel for them to collect the bugs and get them out of the field. So in terms of control, that's probably one of the most common questions that we're asked is, what do we do to control Colorado potato beetle? So one year, and this is probably about 25 years ago, right in the thick of the, Colorado's like everything, they go in cycles. So they were terrible back in the late 80s and early 90s, and then they petered off in the mid to late 90s, and then we really didn't have to worry about them until, early 2000s. In the last 10 to 12 years, they've come back, and they're on the upswing now, and they're getting to where they're pretty bad again. But they do go through cycles, so if you are having a hard time with potato bugs now, our experience is that cycles, there's up and down cycles, and they're now in an up cycle. So there will be another down cycle in which they're going to go on the way out. So in the meantime, I think that for most people, and I know I'm going to get some eyebrows raised with this statement, but I'm going to stand by it. I think the best way for you to control Colorados on a moderate to small scale is doing a good job of picking them off the plant every 2 to 3 days, and doing that faithfully. And to those people that kind of get grossed out at the thought of squeezing them and killing them, you don't need to do that. You can just drop them into a bucket, and then a cup or a bucket, and then at the end of your session you can fill it with water or something, or drown them, or put them in diesel oil or gasoline or something to kill them that way. Put them in a container, and an airtight container, something like that. Yeah, Teresa's saying they could wear gloves. I guess I've just become a hardened potato grower. I know what destruction they can do. I don't have any, I don't flinch at all when I crush them. And to me, if I'm walking through the field roguing potatoes and I see a few on a plant, the quickest thing for me to do is just to squish them. And I know that's a lot better than coming back later with a backpack sprayer. And, in a matter of 10 or 15 seconds, I can take care of anything that's on a plant. And invariably, the plant that they're on is going to be a sick plant that, it might have virus in it. And it's one that we're going to rogue out anyway, but we've noticed that correlation that the sick plants are the ones that Colorados go for. Okay, Rich is saying he feeds to chickens. We've tried that, and I don't know what's wrong with our Maine chickens, but they they seem to turn their beaks up at them. They don't seem to be interested. I'm glad to hear. Is there a special recipe you have for preparing them so your chickens like them? Because our chickens just don't have any interest in them. I would guess that they're fairly tasting. I mean, if you're a bug that eats potato plants, I would not think that you're going to be delectable, and I've assumed that it's something like that our chickens don't like, but I'm glad to hear that there are some chickens down where Rich lives that can do some extra good in the world by eating potato bugs. Let's see, where was I? So the temperature is a big factor. If you're in a hotter climate, you're going to have more generations, and the potato bugs can be a problem. I think picking bugs is a good technique, and I'll tell you, I wouldn't be giving you this advice except I've done it. I have my own experience doing it. And back we had an isolated field in which we had a double row of red Dale potatoes that were right in the heat, in the heart of this potato bug epidemic, that I decided I was going to try to raise those red Dales without any input besides my fingers. So I would be out there every couple of days, and there were some days where I did feel like throwing the towel in. It was an effort, but at the end of the experience, I was able to get a good crop off of those red Dale simply by controlling with my fingers. So that's why I say that the best way in my book is that if you want to, if you've got 500 row feet or less, and you have the ability to get out there every couple of days, the very best way is to pick them off and to kill them that way. It's much better than applying a material, and any input you apply, any spray you apply, eventually is going to fail, and they're not going to fail if you're picking them by hand. So that's my recommendation, and I know some people are not going to want to do that, so that means there's going to have to be alternatives that they've got to investigate. So let me catch up with a couple of questions that have come in. Rich is saying, mixed with Japanese beetles, but you're right, they don't. Okay, so you're saying you're feeding the Japanese beetles to the chickens, so your chickens are no more lazy than our chickens. They don't seem to like them, and that's my guess, is that they just taste bad. So Laura is providing a hot link there for an insect killing jar. Sounds like a good idea. I don't have access to that link, but I assume that it's a way of suffocating them. And Arthur's got another comment. My chickens refuse Colorado potato beetles. The beetles seem to survive hanging out in water, and from my own experience with beetles in a sap bucket filled with water, I think over time they're going to drown. One of the techniques that the extension guys in Long Island came up with, and we experimented with it for 2 or 3 years here, was to create a trench on the south side of the field, line that trench with black plastic, and then cover the edges, and then you apply this. You dig the trench early enough in the spring where the temperatures are low enough so the Colorados can't fly into the field, and they've migrated to the fields and woods south of the field, so as they're walking into the field, they can smell the potatoes. They're walking into the field, they slippery slide down this plastic, which gets coated with dust, which I guess is slippery for them, so they fall into the bottom, and the sides of this are on about a 45-degree angle, and the Colorados can't get out of there. Well, what we found was as you'd get rain, the V in the bottom of that plastic would fill up with water, and these guys would eventually drown. So I think it's a function, if they have no other way of getting out, and they keep slipping and sliding back into the water, I think over time they did drown. Maybe they just died from exhaustion of trying to get out, and maybe we came upon Colorados that had died and then were floating on the water. I guess I don't really know that, but there would be water that accumulated, and I was working on the assumption that they would drown if they had no way of escape otherwise. So, it was a lot of work to do this, and early in the spring, the last thing a farmer has to do is to become a construction engineer And it was a fair amount of hand labor. And then there are some Colorados that go to the west side of the field, and we orient our rows east-west in most years, just not by any great design, except it's how our fields run and the lay of the land. So you can't really put a trench on the west side because you've got headlands to get in and out of your field and between the rows. So, you're not going to keep them out. I heard these miraculous numbers of thousands or hundreds of thousands of potato bugs that were being captured in this, and we were capturing them. It was working, and we did have, severe populations, but we never had numbers like that. So we finally decided that that was not the best solution for us. And we've found that simply rotating the fields is helpful. This last year we had all of our potatoes on the home farm, and next year, this year, the next cropping year, we're going to be across Kinney Road in what we call Field 31, the first southmost field. And going back, we broke our string probably 8 years ago and 4 years ago, but prior to that, we've got a 4-year rotation. So prior to that, for about 20 years in a row, we never had to do any control for potato bugs in that field 31, the first field on Bootfoot Road, or on Kinney Road after we left the home farm. Rotation after rotation after rotation. In other words, it took the Colorados about a year to figure out where the potatoes were. And between the home farm potatoes and Field 31's potatoes, we've got a pond, we've got woods, we've got some fairly inhospitable territory, and probably, it's probably 600, 700 feet between the two, and it took them that long. So our great streak ended, I think it was 8 years ago, that we had to do some control. And again, we're on the upswing now. I suppose everybody gets smarter if you're going to keep living, and that must pertain to these Colorados, because they are a bigger problem now than they've been for a while. And I do expect that that's going to shift at some point. So we do think that picking Colorado potato beetles is good, but I do want to caution. I have seen fields that have been completely defoliated right back to the stems on the plant. They'll eat the leaves first, then they'll go for the stem, and they'll eat you out of house and home. So I don't put these slides up in an effort to scare you. I just put these slides up to let you know that it's something you've got to reckon with. And I do think, we have seen this, we see this every year. The potato bugs, they go for the sick plants. And Arden Anderson, one of the great agronomists who teaches courses on soil and organic soil management, he calls insects nature's garbage collectors. And he says, his view is that the insects are doing us a favor because they're taking out the weak and the sick plants, and we should, give them a medal for doing that. So if you do get your soil together and you've got a good, healthy soil, you're going to have less problem from insects. So that is one of the goals. Well, one of the alternative control materials out there is parasitic fungus called Bavaria bassiana. There is a material that we've used over the course of 25 years. We don't use it that often, but it's called Micatrol O. And it is this Bavaria bassiana in a dry powder form, and you mix it into water and then you spray it on the plant. What you do is you're putting on the plant these fungal spores, and then when a Colorado walks by, one of these spores will attach to its leg, and then it will start to colonize on the Colorado, and it will kill it. And then in the cadaver, so as it colonizes, it then starts to reproduce the spores, and on each cadaver of a dead Colorado, it will create 1 million spores that are then redistributed throughout the potato field. So it's a great tool. We found that it gives good late season control. We used to use it in unison with the BT tenebrionsis, which was the Bacillus thuringiensis bacteria for Colorados that we're no longer able to use because there's a group 3, no, a group, yeah, there's a group 3, EPA group 3 inert ingredient used in it, and American organic farmers are not permitted by NOP regulations to use it, which kind of irritates me because organic farmers in Europe can use the exact same product, and we're supposed to have reciprocity, and I pointed this out to the USDA NOP officials and have made no headway with them. But the European organic farmers, they can use it, but our guys say that now you can't use it because there's an ingredient in it that does not meet our regulations. So when we use that, that was a good control early in the season for when the larva was small. It would not work on fourth instar or adults, but it would work good on the first through the third instar. And then we would use Mycotrol O or Bavaria bassiana late season. And in fact, we got into this. University of Maine was doing testing on our farm and a couple of other farms in the state of Maine. And they were finding, you know, they did this for several years, I don't know, 4 or 5 years anyway. And they found that by using a combination of 3 materials, or 3 inputs, 1 Bavaria bassiana, 2 this Bacillus thuringiensis strain, the product name for that was Novador, made by Novo Nordisk. And the third was the spined soldier beetle, which was a parasitic insect that would be a predator of Colorado's. But by properly using those 3 inputs, we were gaining as good a control through these organic techniques as conventional farmers were gaining using their hard techniques. In fact, in some years, we were gaining better control. And it was a 3-legged stool. You had 3 different biological controls, so you were not reliant upon any one. And the chance of an individual Colorado potato beetle developing resistance to all 3 control measures at once were infinitely small. So it was a good ecological system. This became very significant potato research, and if you go back in our archives for our Seed and Peace newsletter going back 20 or 24 years, I find some of the articles about this. It was called the Potato Ecosystem Project, and they had soil scientists working on it, they had entomologists, plant pathologists, multidisciplined, and it was very important research that probably has not yet been matched, even though it's 20 or 25 years old. So Bavaria bassiana is a material that is, the Mycotrol O, as I recall, it is OMRI approved, so organic farmers should be able to get permission from their certifiers to use it. But as I'll remind somebody again this week, if you're a certified organic farmer, you always, no exceptions, want to get permission from your certifier before you use a material, because there's a lot of sad and sorry farmers that didn't go to that great length and ended up using material that was not permitted, and they got suspended for 3 years on that ground. So you want to make sure that your individual certifier gives you permission to use that before you use it. So I want to talk about one more insect here as we wind down. Potato leafhopper is, talking to Bob Pleistad, retired now, but he was the potato breeder for many years at Cornell. In his area in New York, he felt that whereas Colorado potato beetles got more of the blame for being a terrible insect pest of potatoes, he felt that there was probably more damage caused by potato leafhoppers, at least in his area of New York, than Colorado's. And part of the problem is these PLH are so small, they're hard to see, and a lot of people just wouldn't even notice them. And what they do is they feed on a plant and they insert their probe, and once they insert their probe in their saliva, they've got this, I don't know what it is, it's probably an enzyme, that it gets into that plant and it starts to kill the cells on the plant. So as they're sucking the sap out of the plant for nourishment, their saliva is putting in this enzyme which is causing cellular destruction of the potatoes. So that row on the right there, that is called hopper burn, and that comes from these little critters feeding on them, and they can be a real pain. They can just come in clouds, and their numbers can be significant. It used to be that we almost never had them in northern Maine, but now we're getting them much more regularly. I would say in the old days we might get them once out of every 10 years. Nowadays, I would say we're probably getting them once every 3 years as the climate is warming. One of the realities is they used to overwinter on the Gulf Coast states, and because they can't take a cold winter. Well, now as the winters are more mild, they're able to overwinter further north, so they have less distance to travel in the trade winds coming up here. And our rule of thumb is if we don't see a leafhopper until the 1st of August, we're probably going to be okay with minimal effort at trying to control. But on the other hand, if we get them in here the 1st of July, then we've got a headache on our end. So they're tough to control, and we've had mixed success spraying kaolin clay. That's spelled, is it Kaolin, and the product is called Surround WP, wettable powder WP, and it basically puts, it's a white clay, and it's not harmful to people. In fact, in your toothpaste, there's probably kaolin clay. It's kind of an abrasive to keep your teeth shiny and white. So you'd spray that on. Once the leaf dried, it would leave behind this white powder clay residue, which then would, the leaf hopper would brush up against it, and it would attach to their leg, and they'd go into excessive grooming, and then the excessive grooming meant that they weren't mating and they weren't reproducing, and it would be a control. And I know that it works pretty well in the west where they don't get rain in the summertime, and if you're drip irrigating, say if you've got fruit trees, you might apply it for control of insect pests. And actually they've found that that white on the leaf reflects away sunlight, so it actually keeps the tree cooler and can keep the quality, the health of the tree and the quality of the fruit higher as a result of that. So we've had mixed results, but the problem is you get a wet summer in Maine when it's raining a couple of times a week, and that becomes a, you start to wonder, is this stuff all getting washed off? And our testing indicated that some of it was still staying on, some of it was still working, but we probably haven't used it for 10 or 15 years. Yeah, okay, Rich Streeter is saying that he's using it. I think it will work, if you wanted to get out there and spray it on every time after it rained, like the day after it rained. I would go back to using it. I kind of like the fact that it's more of a physical impediment. It's not got a poisonous quality to it, so I like that aspect of it. But I think it would be hands down a benefit in the West where they don't get rain in the summer, and they can apply it and not worry about it washing off. Here, the general control that organic farmers have in the Northeast is to use Pyganic 5.0. And Pyganic is a broad spectrum organic material. It is derived, I think, from the chrysanthemum. And it's broad spectrum, and I don't like it in that way because it can kill beneficials as well. But if you get early onset of potato leafhopper, it is something that can control it, and you're going to have to spray it, probably every week, and it'll beat the plants down. But your goal is to try to keep the plants healthy enough so that they can get, the tube sized up. So if you do get it, we've used Pyganic. I don't really enjoy using it, but we're trying to make our living growing potatoes, and when an insect like that comes in clouds, you've got to do something to protect yourself, and those who don't end up with a problem like in the slide here. And you can get pretty significant yield loss if the invasion comes early on and you get defoliation. So the yield loss comes from early premature defoliation. You've got no, the plant factories, the sunlight factories are shut down. They're not making plant food, so it no longer is helping to build up the size of the tuber. So you can get significant crop loss in potatoes. There does seem to be variation between varieties. Some varieties seem to be much more susceptible to potatoes, and I think the variety on the left is Satina, which is a Dutch variety. So obviously you've got a variety on the right, and I don't know what that variety was, but it is highly susceptible. And the Satinas on the left obviously are under the same conditions, are doing very well. So if Colorados and leaf hoppers are presenting a problem, we have found that there is a variation by variety. Some varieties stand up better. And this brings me to a general comment that I'd make. We think that two varieties that we are really glad to be growing, and I imagine we're always going to grow them, is King Harry and Island Sunshine. And here's why. King Harry was a potato bred traditionally. It's not genetically engineered, but it was bred by the potato breeders Bob Plystad and Walter D. Young at Cornell. And they took a wild relative of potatoes that has hairy leaves, and they bred it with some mainstream round white potatoes, and they came up with this hairy series of potatoes. And the first variety that was in their program came to be named, it was NYL 235-4, which came to be named Prince Harry. And this King Harry is the next successor in the same breeding line. But here's how it works. Those hairy leaves, they've got glandular, they're called glandular trichomes. To farmers, we call them hairy, hairs. They're hairs on the leaves. So a Colorado walks up against them, and the hair breaks, and then a goo, kind of a sticky goo, comes out of that, gets attached to the potato bug's or leafhopper's leg. They go into excessive grooming. In other words, it's an irritant, and they don't like it, and they pull out, and it's really remarkably effective. The King Harry is a much higher quality, eating quality potato than the Prince Harry. The Prince Harry was high yielding, but it was a fairly bitter tasting potato. It had a high level of glycoalkaloids, and I know the good guys at Cornell always were a little bit chagrined that they didn't think the eating quality of Prince Harry was good enough, and it had a fairly high amount of glycoalkaloids. So when King Harry came along, we like it better as a variety. We think it's a good tasting variety, not great, but good tasting. It doesn't do quite as good a job in defending itself against the three big insect pests that these hairy breeding lines are after. It's Colorado potato beetle, potato leafhopper, and potato flea beetle, and it's effective against them. What we like, in addition to King Harry being a great early variety, high yielding, reliable, it is our litmus test for if we've got a problem in our field. First we go to King Harry, and if those are doing good, we'll say, well, could be an insect problem. Then we go to the Island Sunshine, which is one of the most resistant to late blight, potato late blight. And if that's doing good, we'll think that, well, if that's doing good, then it's probably an insect problem. So in other words, with one variety particularly strong against insects, another particularly strong against late blight, we can use this to help us diagnose what is going on in the field. And I'm always glad to have them. It's a great yardstick. And if you've not tried these varieties, I recommend doing that. Unfortunately, we are sold out of Island Sunshine right now, and we're starting to sell out of King Harry, but we do have King Harry for sale. But if you've never grown it, I think it absolutely is worth growing. And like I say, I'm glad, and I want to keep growing it every year because it helps us to be able to be better managers, so we can identify just what is going on, what challenge are we having to deal with. Okay, I see we're already over time a little bit. It's easy to do that. I wanted to let you know we're going to have our final Potato School webinar of this winter series. It'll be our 6th webinar, and that'll be coming up 3 weeks from today, last day of March. It'll be again a Thursday, 1 o'clock Eastern Time. So what we'll do once we sign off here, Frank will get working, and he will turn today's webinar into a YouTube video. As we've done in the past, it'll probably be tomorrow before we do this, but we'll send you an email, and it will have the link to today's webinar. So if you want to listen to it again, or share it with friends, or whatever you want to do with it, you'll have that link. And we'll also provide links of past potato webinars that you can listen to or share or do whatever you want with them. So thanks everyone. If you've got any last questions that you want to ask, I'm sorry I went a little bit long today, but I'll be happy to stay here as long as anyone would like me to answer questions. Thank you, Bianca, I appreciate it. Scott, you're welcome. Thanks for joining us. So go ahead and ask your questions in the next minute or two. We are busy this time of year. It's typical for us. We work 6 to 7 days a week trying to keep up with orders, but it's good. It's a great feeling shipping out potatoes. We're now up to the mid-Atlantic states, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware. We've worked our way up from Florida. We haven't yet started to ship to Pennsylvania or New York, but those states are coming up in the next few weeks. Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm glad that you enjoyed the presentation. Teresa is letting me know that the sound kept cutting out, and she's hoping that she can listen to it again on the video. And she hates to miss anything that Jim says. Well, that's very kind of you, Teresa. So I don't know if it's because I turn away from the microphone or not, but maybe I need to put that mic a little bit closer next time, Frank. Maybe that's the way to do it. Oh, here we go. Okay, Rich is asking about rotation. What do potatoes follow in our rotation? Okay, so here's our rotation. We have a 4-year rotation, which is modified from the traditional rotation in Aroostook County. So the original rotation in Aroostook County was 2 years of potatoes, followed by oats, followed by clover and timothy. So it would be in sod for 2 years, and then in the 6th year it would go back to potatoes, and they'd have 2 years of potatoes. So my opinion is that organic farmers should never have a potato crop following a potato crop. You're going to have a significantly increased pressure for insect pressure and disease pressure, and we think that a good organic rotation is only going to have potatoes in it once a year. So our rotation is 1st year potatoes, 2nd year usually a spring grain like wheat or spring wheat or oats, which is a spring crop. Occasionally we'll plant winter rye the fall before. Like if we take an early crop of Yukon Gold off and we've got some daylight left at the end of September, we may immediately clean that field up and plant a winter rye crop. And then we'll be able to harvest a crop of seed winter rye the next summer. But so in other words, the crop following potatoes is grain. It's usually planted in the spring. We do undersow that grain crop with a mix of 5 different kinds of grasses and clovers. We plant common timothy and perennial ryegrass as grasses. And then we have 3 types of clover. All of these we sell in our catalog and our website. But we've got medium red clover, Alsike clover, which in Aroostook County is called Alsac, and then yellow blossom sweet. And these do well for us. We take an early cutting of hay the next year. That would be the year 3. And then we allow the animals to graze the regrowth beginning in August, September, and into October. And then in the 4th year, once we get done planting our potato crop, we plow down what by then is a grass field with maybe 40-50% clovers in it. We plow that down, and then we immediately plant buckwheat as a plow down crop. Let that grow for 7 or 8 weeks. Chop the buckwheat, plow that down. We typically spread some kind of fertility then. It used to be herring scale, sometimes poultry manure, sometimes local cow manure, and then incorporate that, and then we plant a rapeseed crop in the first 2 weeks of August. And the rapeseed, it's dwarf Essex rapeseed, which we have never been able to find as organic seed, maybe someday, but so far not. But this is a fast-growing member of the Brassica family, and it is a good biofumigant in that it cleans up the soil of pathogenic fungi, so that in the 5th year, when we're back to potatoes, we've cleaned up the soil with this biofumigant. So that's the gist of our rotation. We've had this rotation now for about 20 years. We like it a lot. The buckwheat helps to bring up phosphorus from deep in the soil, brings it up to the top. As it breaks down, it makes that phosphorus available to the potato crop that's following. But anyway, there's purpose in each of the crops that we're growing. We try to keep them different so that we don't have pests that will, potatoes is our main cash crop, so we're not going to grow like a field of peppers, because that would be another nightshade, and we would end up with more disease and probably insect problems too. So that's the gist of our rotation. Let's see, we've got Bianca is saying, do you have a small schoolyard? Oh, we have a small schoolyard garden and plant potatoes in potato stacks. Is there anything different for this way of planting? It is cleaner for kids during harvest time, but the potatoes are small. So I assume by potato sacks you're talking of like these smart bags that we sell. They're kind of like a new age, space age material, but you can use a wine barrel so long as you drill holes in the bottom. The idea is to let the plants, let the roots breathe. Okay, it's actually burlap, and the burlap, I would have thought the burlap would have disintegrated before the end of the growing season. Our soil is extremely full of life and active. It does by the end. Okay, yeah. Well, I'm glad that you make that work. It could be with that drying out. It wouldn't be as hospitable an environment for the microbes breaking it down. But anyway, what we've found in our experiments growing in containers is that the limitation in yield is most often caused by inadequate watering. If you think of a potato plant growing in the soil, growing in a field or in a garden, you've got this massive sink of moisture that the roots are feeding into. And if you then switch to container gardening, it's above ground, you've got a tremendous amount of surface area in relation to mass that is exposed to the air. So in the summertime, that air is going to be hot, that air is going to be dry. So I think it always amazes people at how much evapotranspiration goes on with a potato plant. And I think typically it's hard for all of us to conceive of just how much water that plant would really like to have. So I would recommend, if you've got good soil and if you've got a good source of fertility in it, then I think so long as the plants have been protected from insect and disease pressure, the biggest factor going on is going to be water. You need to make sure that they're adequately watered. And I would say, when we irrigate, when we're into dryness, they're saying 1 to 1.5 inches of water per week. I would say that if you're in containers, you probably want to use 1.5 inches of water as your starting point for that. And if it's a good container that excess water can drain out, then, I'm not saying drown them, but I'm saying, give them plenty of water, because typically those tubers are, 85% water, and if you have insufficient water, the tubers simply are not going to size up, and that may be the biggest reason why you're not getting big sized tubers. Okay, we've got another one.
Do you have it in here? Your rotation scheme, you couldn't keep up.
Oh, okay. Do you have your rotation scheme in written form? Okay, you know, I do. I've got that on a slide. I'll make a note, and on the next webinar, I'll put my rotation slide onto that. So, Arthur, you can pick up the rotation from that. There is a book. There was a group called NEON, Northeast Organic Network, and we met right after 9/11. I remember going through the enhanced security screening, so that was going on 15 years ago. Anyway, we would meet in New York, and this drew experienced farmers from Maine down to Maryland, and our task was to come up with a book that described what our rotations were. And this book, I don't know how many hard copies they printed, but I know it's available online. And I'll make note of that, that for the next webinar, I'll dig out my copy. But, it's 8.5 by 11 and about a 1/4 inch thick. And I don't remember, there must have been 20 farmers involved. And we all got, it's really pretty. There's all different color-coded rotations, but you know, ours was one of those rotations in the book, and I think it was really valuable. We were trying to identify what do new farmers getting into farming, what do they really need to learn in the basics, and establishing a rotation is so critical. For an organic farmer, we thought that this was going to be a good place to start. So it was quite a process. It went on meeting after meeting, and I think the results, I'm really pleased with how it came out, but I know it's available online. I'll try to find, in fact, I think we posted that in one of our Seed Piece newsletters in the last 5 years, so we'll try to dig out that link, and I imagine if somebody wanted to purchase the book, you know, it's all printed and bound. But that goes into a bunch of different crop rotations for farmers that grow, you know, some grow mixed vegetables, some have specialties, and I think it was a very interesting book, and to see the diversity and different ideas that you can plug into, I think that'll be a good topic for us to take up in our next webinar. So thanks for that, and if you can wait that long, Arthur, 3 weeks, we'll include it on the next webinar. Okay. Sounds like we're about done. Again, thanks to everybody for their patience. I'm sorry for the technical problems we had early on, but it looks like we finally got it licked. And I hope you will join us again in 3 weeks, and we'll have our last webinar before we take a recess for the summer, so we can get our crop planted, and we'll come back to things back next fall and winter. So at this point, we'll sign off, and thanks everybody, and look for an email in your inbox tomorrow, and we'll have the link with this website. Thank you, Frank just shifted. If you need to contact us, there is our contact information, and thanks everyone. We'll see you next time.